And we're back now for Is What You Feel More Important Than What You Know? And this is going to be a really fascinating session, I think, from Brendan Judge, who's with News UK. And I'm very much looking forward to what he has to say about this. Brendan?
Thanks, Tyler. I've got a mic here.
Awesome.
Which, is it working? When it comes to accents, so obviously every American thinks British people sound like Harry Potter. So, you know, it works both ways. So I work for News UK. Oh, it's working. We are essentially a content studio situated within News UK, which means that every brief that comes in or every conversation we have with a client or an agency that doesn't involve them saying, we'd like to buy some advertising, comes to us. So we make stuff, which is probably the simplest way of putting it. And Studio was set up about 2 years ago, and we develop client solutions to be delivered in the Sun, the Sunday Times, the Times, Wireless Radio Group, Unruly, Storyful, and we work with people like Sky as well. So we've got the full gamut of brands and platforms. But it does mean that we've got to be a little bit more focused, because the old days of it being, you know, a creative solution being you can do a 4-page pullout and we'll put it in this particular paper. Those days are thankfully for me anyway, long gone. So we say that we're a content studio that puts emotion at the centre of everything we do, or the science of emotion even, because we have managed to quantify and qualify it as well. And I'm actually, by education, a chemist, so it appeals to me greatly. Obviously, I've spent the last 20 years in completely the wrong job doing media. But what does it actually mean? Well, put very simply, what we know about something, and in this case, a pretty obvious comparison, one's very bad for you, one's really good for you. What we now know about something is essentially far less powerful than how we feel. Because essentially why we might know that something might be good or bad for us, it's what we intrinsically feel from a visceral level. Actually, I want to do that, I like that. It's far more powerful than that rational messaging. And that's what we kind of try to tap into at Studio. And this is a quote from a gentleman called Richard Huntington, who is Saatchi & Saatchi, Chief Strategy Officer and also Chairman. I like using Richard in quotes because he's not a massive fan of News UK, so hopefully one day he's going to see himself on one of these slides and it'll be hilarious for everyone involved, especially me. But what does it actually mean? I'm not going to bore you with planning processes for too long, but what it essentially we use it for is that for every single brief we come in, what we used to do is say, oh, we've got all of these brands and here's how many people we reach, would you like to buy it? This is what it's going to cost you. And we don't do it quite like that, because we try and do three things. For every single conversation we have with a client or agency, we create a profile, and we call it AEM, and it's obvious why that is. Planners love triangles. So it's an audience profile, and by that I mean we're trying to tell the advertiser, tell the brand, tell the client who our readers are, who the audience is, not just how many. Because that's kind of boring and everyone knows that we reach this many people, that isn't that exciting, not particularly. But the interesting bit is the emotional profile. And the emotional profile is taken from a tool called Unruly Pulse. Now, Unruly is our video platform. And Unruly were basically set up to show loads of videos that were basically on the open web. But what they also decided to start doing was test copy. They were testing pieces of content across the globe and telling advertisers, almost like a beta test, you know, this worked here, this didn't work there. And they had a piece of software that was basic facial recognition software. And what they were doing was essentially putting people in front of a piece of content and watching them watch it. And this piece of software, facial tracking, was registering what emotions people were feeling when they were watching that content. Every kind of emotion you can think of. There's a wheel of about 12, some positive, mostly positive, but not all positive. Surprise, disgust, and contempt is in there. Arousal as well. But things like inspiration, exhilaration, excitement, happiness. And they were saying to advertisers, look, when people are watching this content, this is when this emotion kicks in. Now, why that's interesting is because it's never been measured properly before. And they also found that the higher your emotional engagement with a piece of content was, the more likely you were to remember it, the more likely you were to feel positively about the brand, the more likely you were to find out more about it or share that content. So that emotional engagement was really crucial. Over time, it's built up into a gigantic database, and we saw it from News UK and thought, that's interesting, and we asked if we could use it. So what it essentially means is for every single brief that comes in, we go through the AEM process, and the emotional profile, I can just put in any target audience I like, and it will tell me of the 750,000 different pieces of content across the world, for this audience, these are the emotional triggers that worked hardest, whatever it might be. And that's a really, really powerful thing for us to know and understand from a creative point of view, because it could inform tonality. It could inform who we use for a talent point of view, what brand it fits best with, what kind of story are we telling? And it's really useful and powerful for our creatives within studio. And the third thing that we do is a motivational profile. And that comes from another tool as well. And so essentially, if advertising is about how people feel and what they think, advertising has also got to make them do something. Otherwise, we're wasting everyone's time and money. So the motivational profile, how do we get people to actually do something with this content? What's that trigger that we need to pull? And that gives us a much richer start point for responding to client requests and solutions for businesses than we've ever had before, and putting emotion right at the center of it. So I promised I wouldn't bore you with planning process, but here's the planning process. The AEM profile's created, and then we have the little dark box, and that's where kind of me and my team actually do most of our work, which is the strategic framework. Sounds very grand. What it essentially is 2 charts. I'm not saying it's just 2 charts in totality, but this is what I want to see presented back. 2 charts. The first chart, what is the insight? Now, I do have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with data and insight teams internally and externally. So when I first joined News UK, the understanding of what data and insight was a little bit basic, I think, would be the politest way of putting it. So we have a magazine called Style, and Style is a very upmarket, fashion-led supplement in the Times. And in Style presentations, in the insight chart, every time, without fail, they would say, Style readers love fashion. And I think, well, that's insightful. It's more of an observable fact than anything I can use. And then from the data side of things, we go, oh, we've got all of this insight, and they'd give you a whole bunch of data. And I'd be like, well, that's not really the same thing either, because obviously data without insight is almost meaningless. And insight without data is just someone's opinion. And neither of those are of particular value to me. So a real insight, a human truth or understanding. Second part of it is an organizing thought. And that's why I give to creatives. Creatives do not want to see a gigantic brief. They don't want to see 100 pages of TGI and Google Analytics and clickstream information. What they want is, what's the problem? How do I fix it? And the organizing thought does that for them. And it's only then that the creatives then get together and say, right, what's going to be the idea that we come up with? How do we develop this using the emotional insight we've got to come up with the right idea? Because what used to happen at News is that we'd have everyone in the room, and we'd all sit there flicking through the brief, and then someone would go, oh, I've got a great idea for The Sun. Someone else would go, oh, I've got a great idea for radio, and I've got a brilliant digital idea, or I saw this thing on YouTube last night, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is totally mad. The creative idea has to be entirely neutral. And we don't want an idea that can only work in one place, with one audience, on one platform. Because if it can only work in one place, I'd suggest that it's not the right idea. The final part of it, then, that's when the amplification comes in. Where do we put it? Where's the right place for this to live and exist across all of our portfolio? And that's really how we approach everything. And it's much simplified there, but it's crucial that we get across that. We understand that visceral, emotional response when you're trying to tell a story about a brand is the most important thing. Not what the KPIs are, not what the market share needs to be. What are you trying to do, and what do you want people to feel? So, talked about data. This is our data chart. Lots of different data bits in there. Some of them you'll recognize. Some of them are usual desk-based stuff, Comscore, Google Analytics. Some of them are proprietary, so our first-party data that we know from Time subscribers. And some of them we've just created ourselves. Some of the interesting ones, like Engagement Labs, really like those guys. Used to be called Caliphate, out of Texas, actually, so they do have those accents. And they measure on and offline conversations. So in other words, they claim that 93% of social interactions are still physical, face-to-face. So Engagement Labs measure conversation, and that's important a little bit later when I talk through one of the briefs that we answered for a charity called Movember. So we've got all that data, we turn that into lovely insight, and we're trying to find that emotional truth. And we turn it into stuff like this. If it were. Oh, creatives love that, because that little studio light you saw at the end, that was a real light that we bought, and then within the first morning he blew it up just to make that shot at the end, to show it all exploding. So that's how we spend clients' money at News UK. So we're all talking about planning processes and the importance of emotion and all the fancy tools that we've got to measure that. But it's probably best to talk through a specific example. So Movember is, I'm sure many of you will be aware of the charity, started in Australia. It is a charity about men's physical and mental health. And they've never actually advertised before because they didn't need to. They've got a great story. They've got the cool little, moustache motif. They've got, a walking billboard for their campaign because, across the month of Movember, people raise money for this charity. But they came to us with a little bit of a problem in that they had peak Mo in about 2012. That was the year that most people grew them. They raised the most money, and it was the highest PR they ever had. And since then, it's been going down. So that's terrible news for the charity, great news for advertising companies like ours, because they think, oh, we've got to spend some money now. But their issue was that when they asked people why they weren't doing it anymore, there was two reasons. One was quite basic in that in London, especially where this has got a heartland, a lot of men actually already have facial hair, which they've beautifully groomed and prepared and keep in a delightful shape and wax it, whatever. And they don't really want to shave it off and start all over again. That's a fundamental barrier which we struggled with a little bit. But the main one was that men were saying, oh yeah, I did it a few times with all my mates. The rugby team did it, football team did it, mates at work did it. And I've done it now, and I it was a bit of fun, but I'm not going to do it again. Why aren't you? Well, I don't even know what it's for. And the fundamental problem they had was that people didn't really understand why they were doing it. And you saw that with the famous ice bucket challenge, which was that viral, everyone was doing it. It was actually for Lou Gehrig's disease. And if you ask someone why they were doing it, about 97% didn't know why, and even more people didn't raise any money either, which is a bit of a problem for a charity. So we had a challenge with Movember, which was summed up like this. We needed to raise awareness of their good work. What exactly were they doing with this money? We needed to drive participation and get new people growing Mo's and raising money. And they also put this, and this is the most interesting KPI I've ever had. Stop men dying too young. It's quite bold. Not used to that. But the fundamental thing is it's a charity that tries to address the fact that suicide, for a start, is the biggest killer of men under 45 in this country, which is a staggering fact and one of the most terrible ones I've heard. But also from a physical health point of view, men are also the least likely to go to the GP regularly when something's wrong. Classic male response to any kind of physical ailment is, it's probably just a virus, I'll get over it. And they don't do anything else about it. And that's why prostate cancer kills more men than it should, because if you catch it quick enough, it's entirely treatable. It's only if you go for months, if not years, without even going to a doctor when it becomes a problem, testicular cancer being the same. So we had a fundamental issue there about what is the problem with men actually not discussing and talking about these things. So we went to our friends in Texas, who actually are in the UK as well, and we just said to them, look, engagement labs. what do men talk about? And it didn't matter how you cut it demographically or regionally, education, profession, didn't matter. Men talk about the same things almost universally, and it's a pretty narrow range of topics. It's what you might call your classic pub chat or water cooler chat. Did you see the sport of the weekend? Wasn't it amazing / terrible? Where are you going on holiday? What are you up to at the weekend? Have you seen this in the news? And that's it. It's nothing else. If you do the same exercise, and this isn't a gender stereotyping exercise, although it will turn into one. If you do the same thing for women, you get a far broader range of topics, far more interesting, varied, and there isn't a top 4. It splits all over the place. And we kind of thought, okay, I'm no expert on data, but that's beginning to tell me something interesting about the difference between men and women. So we went to Unruly Pulse and we put in Mobros. That's not a real target audience. It's actually 25 to 40 ABC1 men with a higher education. And Unruly Pulse said that for this audience, the content that works best, the highest emotional engagement they have with content is when it's ranked, by the way, highest to lowest, is these 3. And it was, I like to feel smart. So it's content that's telling me something, I'm learning something, I'm sitting up, and I enjoy that. I like to feel like some knowledge has been imparted. I like to feel inspired. I like content that basically makes me feel as if, oh God, that's amazing, chest out, fist bump. And then a sense of personal pride. Sense of personal pride in someone or something. Those are the 3 key emotional triggers for this target audience to be interested in content. And if we were going to sum it up, if you're going to create the ideal piece of content, it'd probably be something like, man does a marathon, dad's watching him on the sideline, does his hamstring, dad's come on the track, helps him over the line. That ticks all them boxes. Fantastic. They love that. So that gave us an idea of the sort of content that we needed to think about. And we looked at the motivational profile. Again, what makes them do something with the content? Stuff that allows them to start a conversation. Stuff that makes them feel as if they're doing some social good. But the middle one's really interesting. And the middle one was opinion seeking. So what it essentially meant was that men were using content as conversational bait. They'd see something and go, oh, here's my opinion on that, but I'm not going to tell anyone yet. I'm just going to chuck it out into my social network and see what everyone else says, gather the consensus, and they'll go, oh, yeah, that's what I thought as well, or not. So they are quite nervous about having too much of a loud opinion that they think is difficult or dangerous or not normal. And we also, this is a strange picture of dear Deirdre, who is... She's never been involved in many insight and brainstorms, but she was involved in this one. So dear Deirdre is the son's agony aunt. She's a real person, although she's a little bit older than that picture makes her look. So we said to Deirdre, so what's the fundamental difference between men and women in terms of how they engage with you? Because, she's been doing it for like 40-something years. And she said that there's 2 key differences. One is that men will never say what their name is or where they're from. It'll always be anonymous from somewhere. I've got this problem, and women don't care. They'll just be like, yeah, whatever. I'm coming. You're supposed to ask her for advice, right? She is your classic advice person. It's not just about one particular thing. The other interesting thing, and again, sometimes I present this bit and sometimes I don't, but I will, is that men have a very binary kind of topics that they will talk to Deirdre about. Women will talk to her about their children, their education, and they're going on holiday, the problems at work. Well, again, huge range of things. Men, slightly different. Men only speak to Deirdre for 2 things. One is I'm using too much pornography. It's a classic, very, very popular. And the second one, possibly linked, is they quite often say, I'm bored of my partner. There's something wrong with our relationship, and they always think it's the other person. They never, ever, ever think that it could be possibly something to do with them, which again is kind of interesting. So the organising thought that we came up with for this was that there's a problem in terms of psychology of men, how they think. They are afraid. We did focus groups where we said, if you had a problem at work or a problem paying the mortgage, would you talk to your best mate about it? Because he's your best mate, you've known him for years. And he was like, no, of course not. And he goes, well, why? He goes, well, if I tell him, or her, but mostly him, that's burdening them then, becomes their problem. And that's not seen as a good thing. That's seen as, oh, I don't want to give him his problem, it's my problem, so I must deal with it as the man. They don't want to feel diminished in the eyes of their mates. They don't want to feel diminished in the eyes of the loved ones. They don't even want to admit any kind of weakness whatsoever. And we spoke to the Samaritans about it. And we said to them, is there a particular time when people call you? And they said, yeah, it's Friday night and Saturday nights, about midnight, between midnight and 1. And it's basically when the pubs are shut, when their mates have gone home, when everyone's gone to bed, when they're on their own and they feel safe enough, but worried enough, scared enough to call the Samaritans. So the organizer thought was this, that men are scared. Scaredy cats, they're a bit afraid. And so the creative idea we came up with, and bear in mind this creative idea has got to work across all of the relevant platforms, was this. Unsurprisingly using a pun. But it was about the fear of missing out, because we identified that men, the strongest emotion here is fear, right? So we had to communicate to them, like, yeah, it is scary to admit that you've got a problem, or you're not feeling great, or you're depressed, or you feel ill, something's not right. It's scary to do that and to find the right person to talk to, right? But it's much scarier if you don't do that, because that means you're more likely to die. And it has to be that blunt. You're more likely to commit suicide. You're more likely to die from prostate cancer by not getting it checked out. So while it is scary to do all this kind of things, what you miss out on, if you die too young, you miss out on the marriage, your children growing up, the dream job, the dream holiday, all of the amazing life moments that you would have had. And we had to get that across in the creative. We created 350 pieces of content across Sky, The Sun, The Times, Wireless, Unruly. And it had that strong human truth about fear in there. And it had the strong creative idea, and this is a taste of what we did.
I'm going to support by growing a moustache.
If one thing is taken from Movember this year, please make it mental health.
Grow a mo and save a bro.
Grow a mo and save a bro.
Grow a mo and save a bro.
Daniel loves football. It was shortly after that we lost him.
It was just awful.
When I learned he took his own life.
You can be the difference too.
Will you marry me?
What are the real values in life?
Testicles. They're brilliant.
Would you?
You've upset Max, don't upset Max.
I've heard your plea for help and have come to pass on the power of my moustache to you and your helpless pair of hands.
It's Movember deadline day on TalkSport. 3 out of 4 suicides in the UK are men.
Grow your mo. Grow your mo.
So really proud of that. Just some results. So obviously I wouldn't share it if it didn't work. So we smashed the KPI target for people involved. What was really nice about that target as well was that the majority of people who did it were doing it for the first time. So we're getting new participants into the cause. But the awareness of what Movember is about, why they do it, that went up as well. And also we smashed some internal metrics in terms of views, in terms of completed views. So we were creating content that was sticky and engaged and grabbed the attention of our audience and kept it, because we understood the emotional triggers that we needed to pull, press, or whatever. And it's very important for me to feel good about myself in front of my peers. So it's also won loads of awards, which is nice. It's nice going up on stage and winning those. So it won a gold at Media Campaign Awards for Best Content Strategy. And we're working with them again this year. And again, it is a lovely case study because it's got lots of nice insight in it. It's got lots of different data kind of sources. It uses Deirdre. But it's just a very powerful cause. We're working with them again this year. They're actually coming into our office to work on the floor, the Sun floor, to get closer to editorial, because we all believe in it. And it's not every piece of work can be as heartwarming and uplifting as this, but hopefully more will be. But the fundamentals of how we addressed and tackled Movember is the same for any brief. And I think, for me, it gets far more effective work at the end of it. Thank you very much.